Well, good morning to all of you. It's great to be here. Again, I'll say it's great to be here to worship with you and to share things about God and His Word, things that relate to His Word. We're talking about archaeology as it relates to the Bible this week. And with that, still, the Bible is a key part. Archaeology exists for all periods of ancient history pretty much. There's archaeology of Kentucky out there, and some of you may be pretty familiar with it. I'm afraid I am not as much so. But I want to come back to the verse that Walker read for us earlier in our service, Hebrews 11, verse 1. It talks about faith. Faith, okay, is the sermon up there yet? Or is it next in the next slide? Looks like the invitation song's the next slide. So, sorry, just making sure. We'll talk about faith. What is faith? Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And one thing to keep in mind with faith, people sometimes have suggested, are we good? I'll say it after we finish this. Okay, no worries. Yes, I do. It's right here. Okay. What is faith? Eyes over here. Faith is, Hebrews 11:1 gives a very good definition of faith. In summary, it's believing things we cannot see, things we cannot touch. It's the substance, the evidence of things hoped for, unseen. And I've had people tell me before, I don't need archaeology, I live by faith, not by sight. Well, so do I. If we see it, it's no longer faith, right? We have faith that we go to heaven someday. What happens when we get to heaven and we're able to be in the presence of God? Is it faith anymore? It will not be. I have faith the sun will rise tomorrow morning in the east. Why? But we've seen it rise many times in the past, but have any of us seen it rise tomorrow yet? No, it's still faith. Now why do we think it's going to rise tomorrow? Because we've seen it rise many times in the past. And that gives us good reason to have faith that it will rise tomorrow. And that's how archaeology works with faith. Because archaeology is things that we do see. Archaeology, by definition, it's digging up physical objects, things that we can look at, we can touch, we can measure. That's archaeology. Faith means we cannot touch it, we cannot see it, we cannot measure it. So the question this morning is how archaeology, things we see, how do those things work with the things we cannot yet see? Faith. And they do have a relationship together that we're going to talk about in the next few minutes. As far as my own credentials, why am I talking about this? If you wanted to learn about archaeology, why did you invite me here? And I'm not the world's expert on these things, but I have had a lot of experience in it. I was blessed, starting in the year 2009, to participate in an excavation over in the Bible lands. And I've been back from 2009 through 2019. I was involved every year except for one. And Lord willing, I'll do it again at some point. The pandemic sort of shut a lot of things down, and schedule and other obligations have prevented me from going back. But who knows? Maybe it'll happen at some point. If so, you're invited to come with. Almost every year I've taken people with me. And it's a real blessing to be able to do those things. And yet we're still, archaeology is things that we touch and see and, physical objects. But they do impact our faith. I want to talk about that relationship. Let's go ahead and get it out of the way. Archaeology can be exciting. How many here are fans or have appreciated any of the first 3 Indiana Jones movies? Several. I don't necessarily count movies 4 and 5. I'm not alone in that. But Indiana Jones, even then, he's not really an archaeologist. Archaeologists don't make a habit of fighting Nazis or even fighting guys. The fighting tends to be, in articles that are written, and that's about it. Archaeology does not go through and knock down an entire temple just to get a piece of gold out of it. Archaeology is very different. It's systematic. I want to talk about how archaeology works a little bit. How does it work? If we want to talk about how archaeology works with faith, let's start with talking about how it works to begin with. If you've seen the Indiana Jones movie, that is not how archaeology works. I'm sorry if that disappoints, but that's just the case. Now, this is a short version of it. Once an archaeologist decides where he or she wants to excavate, we typically mark out in squares. Mark out an area, and maybe we get several of them, little snapshots, little samples of the site, and we spread it out. We typically use sandbags because it protects the barrier from collapsing, from being stepped on, climbing in and out all the time. And visually, it's a very clear demarcation of what's being excavated and what's not. And basically, you just take out the dirt in a controlled fashion. No whips involved, no revolvers involved, though we do wear hats typically. But we take like a garden hoe or a small pickaxe, we loosen the dirt, scrape it up, and put it into buckets. And then we dump the buckets. But we're always watching to see, are we seeing anything, come out of the ground or appear as we're removing dirt. And we go systematically across the square. We don't just dig holes. Like when you drain a bathtub, the whole thing kind of goes down together, right? That's how archaeology is supposed to work. You take your area and you just bring the whole thing down at the same time. And that way, if we find something here, we find something here, we can tell if they're on the same level or if one of them is deeper and maybe older than up here. That's part of understanding how they relate to each other. So we go down slowly, and if it's sloped, we level it off. And if you look at this picture from a few years ago, one of my digs, you see that we've marked off an area and we've taken it down. And behold, there's a stone back there. Is that stone important? Is it part of anything, or is it just random? Well, the answer comes when we dig some more. Let's take out some more dirt. And so we take out some more dirt. Look at this next photo and look at the right side. See over there, there's now a flattish, whitish stone that has appeared. Okay? So we have two stones. Are they connected with each other? Are they part of something together, or are they from different periods? How did they come to get there? Are they random rocks, or were they put there by people? Those are questions we now need to ask. Are they significant? Are they part of anything? And where do we find the answer? How do we get the answer? Take out some more dirt. So we keep going across the whole thing, and that stone on the right, we eventually uncovered some more stones. And there's the main one we found. Then we look around it. We see some other smaller ones about it. So look at that. The question we're now asking, okay, we have several stones. Are they randomly there just by natural processes, or were they put there on purpose? And how do we answer that? Well, when people put stones together, there's usually order. Stones that just occur randomly, there's a disorder, a chaos. But people who put stones there, we tend to have like lines. Maybe we have some sense of design or order there. So do we see maybe a line of stones right here? Maybe. They're in a straight line, but is that just coincidence? Are they really in a straight line? So let's take out some more dirt, and now we have this. Does that look like it's accidental or on purpose? And I think most of us will look at that and say, yeah, someone put those there. We see what definitely looks to be a straight line, and then maybe a corner on the left, and it goes back. And as we're getting further down, we're seeing maybe it's a building, a structure of some kind. That's definitely made by humans. And by the way, we're not digging only in this little spot. We have another area beside where people are doing the same thing. And we step back and look from a different angle, and they're finding stones also. And so we look through the barrier between our two squares, and there's the one we've been looking at, and we see what looks to definitely be a corner and the straight line. And look over here. Do those piles of rocks seem to relate to each other? And I think they do. And so we have what looks to be a building. And so that's evidence of humans putting something together. And so we're on to something. And so how do we learn even more about it? We keep taking out dirt. And when we take out dirt, we might find objects on the ground. maybe inside these walls that we're uncovering, maybe outside. And those objects might help us figure out what it is. And so we take out some more dirt, and let's get back to our little square. And look, we're finding there's a pile of rocks here now that's separated, but seems to be a little stack of rocks, or was a stack of rocks. And over here, we see this circular thing begin to emerge. Those aren't rocks, but it's mud brick, very packed mud, like the Israelites used to make in Egypt. And people still make mud brick today. When you don't have stone, you take mud, put it in some straw to act like as rebar, give it some structure, and you bake it, and then it's almost as hard as rock, and you can stack them and build things. And we have the circular structure, and we look at it, and it's mud brick. And of course, the curve, so that's not accidental either. So after 2 weeks of digging, almost, that's what we have. So what is it? And we seem to have that circular thing. Maybe it's a platform. Maybe somebody stood on it, or maybe something was placed on top of it. And we have this little stack. Maybe that's used for some kind of ritual or purpose. And what we discovered, I'll give you the answers. We found objects in the ground. We found bones of animals. We found a trash pit off to the side where people were dumping trash and a lot of animal bones, broken pots. And we go back in the other squares and look at the other parts of the building. It turns out to have been a temple from the biblical time of the Judges, about 3,200 years ago. And we discovered the temple was burned to the ground. We found evidence of fire, and the soil was discolored, and there's a layer of ash. And so it was a temple that met a violent, fiery end at some point from other things. But how do we learn all of that? Because we take dirt out, look at what's there, we analyze it, compare it. But then we have to take all these things and we analyze them and we research them. We compare them with other things people have dug up. And have people dug up other similar buildings? The things we're finding on the ground, have people found those before? And what did they learn? And maybe we can understand ours by comparing. We do all of that. And then we take the animal bones and we take them to a laboratory. We clean them and process them. And the lady in the purple, she's a Christian from a church in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, who went with me one year. And she spent most of her time in the lab cleaning bones with a little toothbrush. But we can analyze, specialists can look at a bone and tell you what kind of animal it was and where in the animal it came from. Are these animals for sacrifices? Have they been cut with butcher's blades or knives, or are they just random, rodents? Or what are we talking about here? So we take all this research, all this analysis, and we figure out what it seems to mean. And then we publish it. We write articles, we write little books. Here's what we found, and we know here's where we found it, how we found it, and what we think it all means. And we let other people who want to read it and then check our conclusions. Do our conclusions make sense? Sometimes someone else can look at the stuff we found and notice something that we missed. And that's an important part. Because we all check each other and we find what makes the most sense. And then we hopefully understand how it fits in, what we can learn from that culture, and maybe sometimes if it relates to the Bible in some way. That's how archaeology works, in a very small version of it. And if we're going to talk about how it works with faith, it's good to know something about how it works. Now, there's a question I'm asked a lot. Well, how do we know how old something is? That building I gave 3,200 years ago, how do we know that? If we're going to understand it with the Bible, it's good to know, are we in the right period? Is this really from the time of the Judges, or is it from the time of Abraham, or maybe the time of Jesus? Are we getting that right? And that's an important thing to be sure about. And here's the simplest way to understand it. I'm staying with the Collins this week, and their house, they told me, was built in 1923. And you've been over there, I assume most of you have, and seen houses built 100 years ago. Do they look like houses built 5 years ago? Houses look very different depending on when they were built, don't they? Houses have style. Houses have fashion. And I'm looking at the way you're dressed right now. And your fashion. Are your clothes you're wearing this morning, are they the same things that people would wear to church 70 years ago here? Probably not. See, styles change, fashion changes. And one thing we find more than anything else is pottery. You see a picture up there of a broken pot. Pottery, we've discovered, has fashion. It has style, and it changes over the centuries. And here's an example of how that works. Can anyone tell me, well, I'm not going to ask you here out loud, just answer to yourself. You see this artifact. It's a pretty complete artifact. Can anyone give me a rough date for this artifact, the white-colored artifact? Roughly what year are we talking about? Can we get within 10 years? If you think you have an answer for that, I think I know roughly what. Look at the style, look at the form. Compare it with this one. Can we get an approximate date for that artifact? They're both similar purposes or similar objects, but the style changes. And how about this one? Can we get an approximate date for that one? And let's put one more in there just for fun. I used to own one of these back before I was married. And now I drive a big white van, which looks very different. That's what happens when you have 5 kids. Your vehicles change. Yeah. But do we have an approximate year for any of these artifacts? And if you know much about vehicles or cars, you might be doing pretty well. I'll give you the answers. The white one down here, the first one, 2019. So 6 years ago. The one up there, the top left, that's a 1942 Jeep. And then the one the top right, that's a 1908 Model T Ford, 1908. And that last one, the red one, that's a 1967 Ford Mustang. See, and maybe some of you knew all of that. And if so, bravo. I had to look a couple of those up, I'll confess. Not the Mustang, but I had to look the other ones up. Fashion, style, we can date things. We can date houses, we can date cars, we can date clothing, right? Pottery works the very same way in archaeology. We're digging up and we find broken pots or big enough pieces, and someone who studied them can look at it and get within 100 or 200 years usually, which is not too bad. If you're digging thousands of years later and you can put it within 100 or 200 years, that's pretty good. And there are other techniques that can help us zero that in even more. Or we can look at it like this. Date these artifacts. Does anyone know what that is? If you think you do, what time period roughly? Here's another one. They're all found in the same room. What are we looking at here? That first thing, it's a cannonball. And so what time periods were cannonballs used? And maybe that gives us a few hundred years. Then we find this other one. And what's that? Well, we talked to a specialist, and that's an army cap from the Confederate Army of the United States Civil War. So that puts us in the 1860s, and they used those kinds of cannonballs in the 1860s. So can we date our room? We're looking at the 1860s right now. And then, oh, what luck, we found a coin. And coins are great. And this one has the year 1862 on it. So what time period is our room? 1860s, 1862, 3 different things all point to the same period. So that's pretty specific. But there's one more thing that needs to be found. Now we think we have it all figured out. We're writing our report, 1860s, and someone's cleaning up, and oh, we found one more thing. It's an inscription. And it says Historical Museum, 1930s. Oh, oops. Yeah, does that change what we think we just figured out? It does. It's a museum. The stuff in there is not, the room is not from the 1860s probably. It's from later on, and people brought stuff from the 1860s for that little museum. So archaeology, it's not perfect. What if we never find the inscription that says museum? Then there's always a chance there's something else to find that might change what we think we know. It's an imperfect science, but it's always growing and refining and questioning, and that's a healthy thing. But that's how archaeology works in a nutshell. We find objects and we use those objects to understand when and where and why, all those kinds of things. Now, how do we know something is besides the pottery? Sometimes we see that there are layers on sites. This was from this period, but then it was destroyed, and underneath, if we go beneath the floors, there's a whole other set of buildings and objects. We go beneath those floors, there's a whole new set of buildings and objects, different periods. People often will build on top of old things, and so the further down we go back in time. So someone 3,000 years ago built stuff, it was destroyed, and then 50 years later, someone comes and builds on top. It's a newer level. And so we can use those layers, those strata, to get older and younger figured out. Sometimes archaeology connects with history, written records that we have. Here's one example. It's in London in the British Museum. It's from the ancient Assyrians, northern Iraq on a modern map. It's called the Kurk monolith. It's from the 800s BC, made by a king of Assyria named Shalmaneser II. But one thing that's interesting about this, it's him recording his battles and bragging at how powerful and good he is in warfare. Every king, if you believe every king, they were all incredible in battle. And they always won every time. Isn't that amazing? Like, no one ever tells a lie, no doubt, right? But he says that he fought against a group of enemy kings that banded together against him. And one of them is named Ahab from Israel. And we recognize that name, don't we? Now this battle, we learned it was fought in 852 BC. We looked at the Bible and we realized the Bible doesn't tell us about this particular battle. But that's okay. Ahab reigned for 2 decades roughly, more or less. And we're only given bits and pieces, small stories about the whole period. It doesn't tell us everything. This battle is not mentioned in the Bible, but the Assyrians give more details. They say he fought with several other kings. He also brought 2,000 chariots and 10,000 soldiers from Israel to fight against the Assyrians. And so what does this do for us? Well, it confirms Ahab apparently existed. He was a real guy, and the Assyrians recognize him, and he was very active in international affairs and politics. And we also get a time frame. Ahab was king apparently around 852 BC, so that gives us a fixed point to kind of measure when he was king, and maybe other things as well. So archaeology can work with the Bible in this case and help us figure out some things about Ahab's character, the nature of his kingship, and we get a time period. And so we get some help with that. It illuminates some of the Bible. Here's another artifact by another king, Shalmaneser III, a little later. And this stone is also in London in the British Museum. It's Assyrian. And it shows different countries bringing tribute to Assyria. Here is some of our wealth. Please don't attack us, O great king. And the king's like, thank you. You bought yourself another year of peace. And he wants everyone to see how much treasure he's getting from all these peoples. And one side of this stone portrays another king of Israel named Jehu. And Jehu, in fact, is the one who killed the family of Ahab and took over management of Israel. And we know something about him in 2 Kings, Jehu. It says that while he did get rid of Ahab and those influences, those evil influences from Ahab, 2 Kings 10 says Jehu was not careful to walk in the laws of God. He didn't turn away from certain sins. And look at that last part. In his days, the Lord began to cut off parts of Jehu's kingdom of Israel. And another king, Hazael, defeated Jehu. So Jehu lost territory. According to the Bible, was Jehu a powerful king? No. He lost territory. He was a weak king. He's mentioned in this artifact, and this picture names that guy kneeling down as Jehu, or his representative. Kneeling down, bringing tribute, and lists some of the treasures that they bring Assyria, gold and silver and tin and other valuable strategic metals and some symbolic things. Is Israel a powerful or a weak kingdom according to this inscription? Israel's bowing down to the Assyrians. They're weak. Doesn't this match very much how the Bible describes Jehu, a weak king? And it pairs with what we read in the Bible. We have this physical object and they complement each other. And we gain, that description of Jehu being weak, that bears out. The other people saw him that way as well. And he's giving away Israel's treasure because he can't keep it peacefully. He can't keep it peacefully by himself. And we look at this picture on the side. Some of those are Assyrians and some of those are Israelites. Can you tell which is which? It's propaganda. The Assyrians are the tall ones, straight back to their, come on, guys, bring your treasure. And the Israelites are hunched over from the weight of the gold that they're bringing the Assyrians. Israel's pretty weak, and the Bible indicates it, and the archaeology supports that. So we see one way archaeology and the Bible can work together. We get insights and understanding of the bigger picture. But another way, we also get dates, but we also can look at architectural style. I mentioned houses, and buildings change style as well, and so that can help us date things. If we're looking at the 5th century BC and afterward, we have coins, and coins are great. They didn't really exist until the 400s BC, more or less. But coins like today, they have pictures of leaders on them. They have dates, like the year they were made, or something like that. So if we find a building full of coins from a certain king or queen, and we know when that king or queen reigned, the coins are from the time of that king or queen. And we can date the level, the period we're excavating in with that. We also have modern methods like radiocarbon dating. And we have many other techniques that are always being discerned and ascertained, new technologies that are being invented. And what we do is we try to use as many of these as we can and then cross-check them against each other. And they typically do agree. And that boosts our confidence in what we're finding. How does archaeology work with faith, though? Here's another way it works with faith. Now, I mentioned this in the class period. The Bible talks about a Pharaoh named Shishak invading Jerusalem, invading Judah. And we have that mentioned in 1 Kings 14 and in 2 Chronicles 12. It happened in the days of Solomon's son Rehoboam. He's the one who divided the kingdom with his own foolishness. And Shishak of Egypt, weakness, they're divided. And so this is a good moment to come in there and steal some of the gold that Solomon accumulated. It should be Egypt's, so they went and looted Jerusalem and more. And Shishak, the Pharaoh, went back home and built a wall in a temple, and his wall is his history of the invasion. And he's bragging on himself. The gods of Egypt gave me strength and I defeated everybody. We learn from this wall that he didn't only invade Jerusalem and Judah. He invaded Israel. He invaded Philistines. He invaded all the people. Everyone. The Bible is focusing on Jerusalem at that point, so it mentions that. But here's where archaeology can work with the Bible, one way anyway. The Bible says that this invasion happened in Rehoboam's 5th year as king. And it came against Jerusalem. This wall uses Egyptian calendars, the Egyptian calendar, and we're able to read it and understand it. And from that wall describing the invasion, we learn that the invasion happened in the year 925 BC. So using some logic, if the 5th year of Rehoboam's reign is 925, what would be the 1st year of Rehoboam's reign? We do the math. We go back 5 years earlier than 925, and we get Rehoboam's 1st year was around circa 930 BC. And so we have that timestamp. That wall gives us Rehoboam's reign. But who was right before Rehoboam? Solomon. And the Bible tells us in 1 Kings 11 that Solomon was king in Jerusalem for 40 years. So Solomon died, he finished being king around 930. When did Solomon start being king? Do the math. Start at 930, go back 40 years, and we get, About 970 BC, a date for Solomon beginning to reign. So Solomon's around 970, but we keep going from there. David, we're told in 2 Samuel 5 and also in 1 Kings 2, put them together. He was about 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned 40 years also. And then it breaks it down for us. At the city of Hebron, or Hebron, his first 7 years were in the city of Hebron, just king over the tribe of Judah, and for 7 years and a half roughly. And then he goes to Jerusalem and reigns over all the tribes for 33 of those years. So we get more information. So let's do some math. When did David start being king in Hebron? Well, Solomon started in 970, so David was 40 years. We come to a worship assembly and we have to do math. I'm sorry. I don't want to push anyone too hard to turn on their math neurons. But don't worry, I've spent time, I double-checked it. But some of you are math people and no doubt steps ahead of everything already. That puts David starting to be king around 1010 BC in Hebron. And so if he was there 7.5 years in Hebron, when did he start being king in Jerusalem? Roughly 1003. And if he's 30 years old when he started in 1003, we even get a birth year approximately. Go back 30 years before that. 1033, roughly, is David's birthday, depending on earlier or later. There's some rounding in here, of course. But look how much information we're getting from that one inscription. And then another passage in 1 Kings 6 tells us that in the time of Solomon, it gives us, it was 480 years after the Exodus when Solomon started building the temple. And Solomon began building the temple in his 4th year. So Solomon's 4th year is the first year of the temple. Now, when did Solomon start again? 970. Solomon's first year is around 970. So when is his 4th year? Around 966. So according to this, Solomon's temple, the construction began around 966. And then we have this, that math there. And so that gives us more information. It's how many years after the Exodus? 480. If we're taking those years literally, then 966, go back 480 years before that. We're BC, so our math's a little different. Do the flipping around and it gives us approximately 1446. But see how many dates we get out of just one inscription. The date of Shishak's invasion, and see how much we can get from that, and how many people and events we can get a date for in the Bible from just one discovery. Archaeology gives us insights and understanding, for the Bible, and it can work with the Bible in that way. In the class period, I mentioned a bunch of benefits we can get from archaeology. This is one of those. It gives us a time frame, a chronology, helps us understand, some more things in detail. So archaeology works to supplement, to grow our understanding and our perspective. Maybe that's a simple way to put it. But I'm going to give a warning as well. Watch out for certain kinds of archaeology. We have famous events that, movies and Hollywood entertainment do a lot with. And one example is the Exodus. Some of you have seen that movie where Charlton Heston liberates the Israelites from Yul Brynner. Yeah, it's a little dated. It's been a few years. But we have the 10 Commandments. And we have a couple decades ago, or more than that, I guess now, the Prince of Egypt. And a lot of you have probably seen those movies about biblical events with Moses. And, it's popular. They're popular stories. But those things also can feed misuses of archaeology. Is there a way archaeology should not be used with the Bible? Well, yes. And maybe we should focus more ways archaeology can be misused. The Bible's not the problem, I don't think, but sometimes the archaeology can be. Here's one example. Have you ever seen references to people finding chariot wheels under the Red Sea? And that every so often, pictures circulate on social media, or you see a YouTube video or hear something somewhere. And it's always in a video or some photos like these. Someone's gone down there and they found these chariot wheels from Egypt on the bottom of the Red Sea. And wow, that proves the story. And now we know exactly where they crossed. Chariot wheels in the Red Sea. Don't believe that. And I'll tell you why. Because archaeologists are not the ones who found these. There are other people who are not archaeologists who go down with video cameras or just cameras. They take pictures, they take video, but you know what has never been done? In these cases, no one has ever brought one of these up from the bottom for us to look at and check out. Is it really a chariot wheel? If so, can we use some kind of test to get a date for it? Does it match up with when the Bible says these events happened? Or no one's ever done that. But people have made a lot of money from it. If you get enough hits on your video, you make a video and people invite you to speak and they'll pay you something, and you get popular, you write a book. Are these proof of the Exodus? Well, I don't believe they are, because no one's ever brought these things up. That one on the left, it looks like metal, doesn't it? It's kind of shiny in places, but we really can't no one's brought it up to show us. What is this really? Is it really a chariot wheel? We have found Egyptian chariot wheels in archaeology, in tombs or in other places. And can we compare the two? We haven't. And someone took a picture of this. What is that? It looks like maybe the axle and the wheel attached, but it's covered, in organisms from being under the water. No one's ever pulled one up and cleaned it off. What is this really? That's all we're given. And that's not archaeology. No one took any samples of these. Just look at this. What does it look like? And that's as far as anyone goes. One thing we do know is that Egyptian chariot wheels were made of wood. And what happens to wood when it's underwater over time? It disintegrates. Unless you have those rare instances where it's buried in an oxygen-free and anaerobic environment, and then it doesn't. But that's pretty rare. That doesn't happen very often, that you find intact wood under the water. They typically disintegrate. So would we expect wooden chariot wheels just sitting there waiting to be photographed? Does that make sense with what we understand about Egyptian chariot wheels? It doesn't. And so we need to be careful of that. And what do skeptics of the Bible do with something like this? If believers take this and run with it. Archaeology, chariot wheels, it proves the Bible. Does it? These probably aren't chariot wheels. And if they somehow turned out to be chariot wheels, are they the right time period? Are they really from that incident? Or did some ship carrying them, sink in a storm, and that's where they came from? I mean, there are other possibilities as well. And some skeptics will jump on things like this and say those Christians will just do anything to try to prove what they think is right, prove the Bible, and it actually can work against us. And we don't want that, of course. Here's another example. Have you ever seen or heard of skeletons of giants being discovered? That's what we call Photoshop archaeology. Or now we can also call that AI-generated archaeology, right? Just go to ChatGPT and, start putting things in and see what it gives you, right? But if you've ever seen these photos or photos like them, they're fake. We've never found skeletons like that. We've never found them in archaeology. It's fake. It's put out there for someone with other purposes in mind. In fact, look at the skull on the right side. Notice that the front teeth on the bottom are missing. Notice that. And how the top eye socket is filled in with dirt and is a lighter color, and the bottom one is a darker color. Look at those patterns. And then look at this next skull. See it in the middle up there, that giant skull? Can you see the eye sockets behind the guy? That's the same image. The same skull that's been inserted digitally into here. That's not original, that's fake. Someone took a skull and blew it up and stuck it in both of these photos. It doesn't belong there. It doesn't belong there. And look up there at the top. See that little frame at the top? The guy has his foot on top of the skull. They would never do that. No archaeologist would sit there and put weight on an ancient bone like that, especially if it was a giant. That's a clue right there. That's not a real photo. And it's fake. We have never found skeletons like that to this date. So if someone suggests that as evidence for something with the Bible, fake archaeology, don't believe it. Because if it's investigated, it will be shown to be fake, and then people think that we're not credible, that we're not believable. Because are we desperately trying to prove our faith? That's not how archaeology is supposed to work with the Bible. And that's not even archaeology. And one more that's popular is what someone else came up with this. They call it archaeology. Clever, huh? Yeah. And this is one of the things put out there. This one has been put forth several times. This one actually came out again maybe 2 or 3, 4 months ago in the news. Up near Mount Ararat, there's this big formation that's roughly the size of the ark that we read about in the Bible. And someone took the picture and put labels on there and suggests that's Noah's ark. And Okay, I mean, if we use our imagination, we might be able to see some of that. But if we also look at it carefully, that is kind of a weird shape, though. It bulges out weirdly on one side. It's not symmetrical, not really. And so maybe, but can we be sure? And it came up again recently. Someone did some tests and found traces of something that suggests humans could have been around this at some point in the past. Well, that sells it to me. Humans used to be there. There's no other explanation except for Noah's Ark, right? It's in an area constantly inhabited by humans for thousands of years. It could be anything. So we need to be careful we don't overinterpret a little scrap of something, trying to force it into something we want to prove. That's not how archaeology should work with the Bible. And in fact, archaeology can train us to be more careful with the Bible text. If we go to Genesis in chapter 8, the story of Noah and Mount Ararat, there's some details in there which actually can help us understand our chances of finding the ark. Here's a map showing some of the major places in the ancient world. We see Egypt and Canaan and Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and over on the side is Persia. Today that's Iran. But where did the ark come to rest? Mount Ararat? Ararat, it's actually the name of a region in ancient times. It was actually its own kingdom. And other sources give a slightly different version of the name. There was a region, a kingdom called Urartu. And if we look at the consonants, they're the same consonants as Ararat. It is Ararat. And the difference with Urartu and Ararat, it's like my name. In English is Luke. In Spanish, it's Lucas. In French, it's Luc. No, it's the same. Or in Spanish, we have Juan, but in English, we have John. In Gaelic, we have Ian. In Russian, it's Jan. Names are similar, but slightly different language to language. Urartu, Ararat, is the same name, just different languages. Hebrew gives it Ararat, but it's Urartu. And if we look at the text carefully, if we look at historical geography, it was an entire region that was called Urartu or Ararat. And it stretched from the edge of modern Turkey all across to modern Iran. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands of square miles. And so where did Noah's Ark land? The common answer is it landed around or on Mount Ararat. If we look at the text carefully, knowing Ararat was actually Urartu, it was a whole kingdom, Genesis 8:4 says, quote, on the mountains of Ararat, on the mountains of Urartu. Now where is that? If we look at a map, the territory of ancient Ararat, Urartu, there are a lot of mountains. Tens of thousands of square miles of mountains. The Bible tells us it landed on the mountains of Ararat, and that's it. Now what about Mount Ararat? Well, that's a specific mountain in Turkey today, but it didn't have that name, Mount Ararat, until just a few hundred years ago. In ancient times, it had a different name, and it was not Ararat. And in fact, the local cultures even still have different names for that mountain today. And so in ancient times, it was not Mount Ararat. And so are we looking in the wrong place? Possibly. It's a much bigger search area. And we think about it afterwards when humanity is trying to rebuild after the flood. Wood is a very important commodity. You need wood to build cooking fires, to cook your food. You need wood to build structures, shelters, animal pens, to make tools, handles for tools. And where are you going to find a lot of easy, pre-cut, mature wood? Wood's going to be pretty scarce as far as big lumber after the flood, so people probably recycled the ark. How much of it was left? And then where exactly was that ark again? We're not really told, other than the mountains of Ararat, the Urartu. One thing to remember how does archaeology work with faith? Big claims, like we found the Ark of Noah, we need some solid evidence. Because many times people have jumped the gun, have taken a little bit and overinterpreted it and been shown to be incorrect later. And it hurts faith. It gives people reasons to question us. They The Bible, maybe it really isn't true. They make these claims and then it turns out not true, and that makes us look weaker. How does archaeology work with faith when we're careful with it? We need to be cautious with the big claims, make sure we can test the archaeology, and there's always a gap between what we have and what we conclude. That gap between what we found and what we interpreted, that's faith. Faith is necessary for archaeology because archaeology never finds everything. We have to figure out logically what it means. We don't always have everything we want for that. But what we conclude and what we actually have, it's important that we don't overdo it. So huge sensational claims, we should be careful. Has one person or one group, do they have a history of always finding the incredible things? Maybe very lucky people? Be careful. Maybe it's not just pure luck after all. Maybe there's over-interpreting. Is the person even an archaeologist? And not necessarily, and that makes a difference. Is it on video? Most people who make videos are not archaeologists. They're video people, and they approach it differently. And so we need to be careful. Even archaeology, we excavate, we look at it, what do we actually have? And then cautiously look at the Bible text, what does it actually say? And we form our conclusions. I'll conclude with this. Sometimes we do seem, at first look, the Bible seems to say this and the archaeology seems to show that, and they don't agree. Is there a contradiction? Well, if there seems to be a contradiction, it's always one of three answers, one of three possibilities. We'll conclude with this. What possibility do people usually say first? The archaeology suggests this, the Bible says this. People usually say, the Bible's wrong. The Bible made it up. Maybe the story is just a fake story or made up, or maybe it was changed and it didn't originally say that or something like that. Okay, technically that's one possibility. Maybe the Bible is wrong. Some people only go with that one, don't they? But there are two other possibilities that should be considered. What's another possibility? Here's an example. Trying to find the city of Ai. It's an Old Testament city, and the Bible gives us some geography about it and how it looked. And about 100-something years ago, one guy thought he found it. He thought it was this site called Et-Tel. Ai, it fits everything. It fits what the Bible says. And he dug there and found ruins, but it turns out that these ruins are not from the right time period. Ai is the time of Joshua. These are 1,000 years before Joshua. Way too early. Some people see that, the Bible made it up. Well, is there another possibility? What if the guy didn't get the right site? What if he chose the wrong site? Some other people looked at that and there's another site across the valley that actually matches all the details in the Bible as well. The topography, the terrain, and they dug, and it turns out to be the same time period as Joshua. Maybe the archaeology just wasn't complete. They hadn't dug enough. Sometimes the archaeology is wrong. People are digging in the wrong place, or the remains didn't survive for us to find. The archaeology could just not be complete. But there's a third possibility that we'll conclude with today. What could another reason be if there's a conflict between archaeology and the Bible? In 2011, I was digging, and we uncovered this stable from the time of David. And we had columns. What gave it away was on the left side, that's a feeding trough, a manger. Put the food for the animals. And we got very excited because the Bible says that one of David's battles as king, he fought some guys up in Syria, and they had chariots with horses. Israel didn't have those yet. But David, he defeated them, and he hamstrung the horses so they couldn't run anymore and be used as weapons. But it says he kept enough horses for 100 chariots, or 120. And so what's often thought is that maybe David brought those horses back to try to build Israel's own chariot force. Because when Solomon is king next, suddenly Israel has chariots. So maybe David started it, and Solomon, finished it. And so maybe we found Israel's first chariot base. How cool! This is David starting Israel's chariot force. So we found a stable. We got really excited. And at lunch that day, we were flying high until one of the other staffers, a guy named Joab, shaved head, We were getting ourselves all excited, and he goes, guys, bring it down, bring it down. There's more to discover. And that was very wise, because the next day we went out there and we discovered the stable from David's time. There's the 100 chariot reference, and David started it. But the next day we discovered, as we were measuring, the stable's only big enough for mules and donkeys, not horses. It's too big, it's too small for horses. It can hold 3, maybe 4 donkeys, and that's it. This is not a chariot base for horses. It's a farmer's place to put his animals at night. Very different. You see, sometimes the Bible's right, the archaeology is right, but we're wrong. We misinterpret. We try to overinterpret. We make mistakes. It's a very human thing to do. And that's often the solution. The archaeology is wrong, or maybe we're just wrong. And if we look at it those ways, most of these conflicts resolve themselves very easily. So how does archaeology work with faith? We don't believe everything we hear, even if they're Christians saying it. Archaeology doesn't prove the Bible, but it can reveal and confirm and help us understand it as originalists. Be careful interpreting what we have and we conclude. Mind that gap in the Bible. And be careful that we read the Bible carefully and don't make mistakes about what it actually says, like Mount Ararat versus the mountains of Ararat. Those are different things. It trains us to read the Bible more carefully. And finally, how does archaeology work with faith? It works well when we're humble about it. And we don't try to get big heads or smack someone down with our proof, because we can be wrong sometimes. Even if our conclusion seems right, something about it can be incorrect. Well, I've gone a little bit long this morning. I appreciate your patience. How does archaeology work with faith? It gives us insight and understanding to more accurately understand and interpret the Bible. But in the end, faith is always necessary. We're never going to find everything. Faith is what we don't see. Faith is what we hope for. And whatever we find, let's not lose our faith in God and our faith in the promises of God. These physical things, when used correctly, can strengthen our faith in what we don't see. And it's always important to remember that we live for the hope that we don't yet see. If you're not a Christian, take a step of faith. And maybe some of these discoveries can give us more confidence to take that step. But take that step. Obey the gospel of Christ. Have your sins washed away. Do that now while we stand and sing the song that was announced. There's a fountain free.